she overheard her mom calling her ugly while convincing her millionaire fiancé to marry her sister. But what she did next shocked everyone. Hi, my beautiful family. Welcome back to Mr. Peter Stories. May the Almighty wrap every woman in his boundless love, filling her heart with peace, her soul with light, and her life with honor. May he bless the mothers whose tears water the roots of their children's success, the sisters who stand as silent pillars of strength, the wives whose endless love carries homes through storms, and the daughters whose laughter turns sorrow into joy. No woman should ever feel small or forgotten, for she is God's most precious creation, a crown of glory on this earth. Every story I share is written with this love for you. Stay with me until the end, because your presence gives me life, and your trust is my power. Like this video, comment and subscribe to become part of this family. If your heart is true, right, present. If your love is real, right, I am with Mr. Peter. In the house where she was born, Amara lived like a ghost, haunting rooms that were never meant for her. The Harrison estate sprawled across manicured grounds like a monument to success, its towering columns and sweeping verandas speaking of old money and older traditions. But within these grand walls, 28-year-old Amara Harrison had learned that blood meant nothing when love was rationed like precious currency, and she had never been deemed worthy of spending. She descended the curved mahogany staircase with the fluid grace that had taken years to perfect. Her hand barely touching the banister that generations of Harrisons had polished smooth with their confident grips. Every portrait lining these walls told the story of a family legacy, but none of them included her smile. Her face appeared in formal family photographs with the dutiful expression of someone who knew she was present but not wanted, included but not embraced. At 28, Amara possessed the kind of profound beauty that commanded boardrooms and shifted the energy of entire rooms. Her skin was rich mahogany that seemed to hold light within its depths, her eyes the color of liquid amber that missed nothing and forgave too much. She moved through the world with the regal bearing of African queens, though she had learned to dim that radiance in this house where her light was seen as too bright, her strength as too threatening. "Zara, my darling angel, come show Mama what the photographer sent." Camille Harrison's voice floated from the sunlit morning room, dripping with the kind of unconditional adoration that had never once been directed toward her firstborn daughter. Amara paused in the doorway, watching the scene that had played out in countless variations throughout her life. Her sister Zara glided across the Persian rugs with ethereal grace, 25 years old and luminous in the way that fashion magazines worshipped. Platinum blonde waves cascaded down her back like spun silk. Cornflower blue eyes sparkled with the confidence of someone who had never questioned whether she deserved love. And delicate features that belonged in Renaissance paintings completed a face that photographers called pure poetry. "Look at these." "Mama," Zara breathed, settling beside Camille on the antique settee and spreading glossy photographs across the mahogany coffee table. "The Beaumont Cosmetics people want me as their new face for the luxury line. They said I embody timeless elegance." Camille's reaction was immediate and radiant. Her green eyes, so similar to Zara's, filled with tears of pure maternal joy as she gathered the photographs with reverent hands. At 52, Camille Harrison remained striking, her auburn hair perfectly styled, her figure maintained through daily yoga and careful nutrition, her wardrobe a testament to impeccable taste and unlimited resources. But it was her capacity for love that made her truly beautiful. A capacity that seemed infinite for Zara and mysteriously absent for Amara. "Oh, my precious girl," Camille whispered, pulling Zara close and pressing kisses to her temple. "You're going to be famous nationwide. This is everything we've dreamed of since you were little. My beautiful, perfect daughter." The words struck Amara like familiar daggers, each one finding its mark with practiced precision. She stood wearing a charcoal power suit that had commanded respect in this morning's board meeting, where she had just secured a $1 million consulting contract that would establish her firm's reputation in the competitive Atlanta market. Her briefcase contained documents that would change lives, but in this room, her achievements felt as weightless as morning mist. "Congratulations, Zara," Amara said, her voice steady despite the familiar ache spreading through her chest. "You're going to be absolutely stunning in that campaign." They couldn't have chosen better. Something flickered across Zara's face, surprise, perhaps even shame. In all their years of this painful dynamic, Amara had never shown anything but genuine happiness for her sister's victories, even when her own successes were dismissed or ignored entirely. The kindness was real, born from a heart that refused to become bitter despite decades of emotional starvation. "Thank you," Zara replied softly, her confidence wavering for just a moment. "I heard you had that big presentation today with the regional investors. How did it go?" The question hung in the air like a bridge Amara had never been allowed to cross. For 3 precious seconds, hope fluttered in her chest that maybe finally her achievements would be acknowledged in this house. "Oh, Zara, we need to call your agent immediately," Camille interrupted seamlessly, her tone dismissing Amara's presence entirely. "This campaign could launch your international career. We should also discuss wardrobe for the photo shoots, and perhaps hire a personal trainer to ensure you're in perfect condition." And just like that, Amara became invisible again. The sensation was so familiar it barely stung anymore. This vanishing act that happened whenever attention threatened to shift in her direction. She had experienced it at birthday parties, where her academic achievements became footnotes to Zara's social victories, at Christmas mornings, where gifts for Zara came wrapped in genuine excitement, while hers felt like obligations reluctantly fulfilled. At family dinners, where her words were interrupted by praise for her sister's latest modeling gig or romantic adventure. "I'll leave you both to celebrate," Amara said quietly, turning toward the hallway. "Actually, Amara," Camille called without glancing up from the photographs. "Mrs. Whitman called about the Children's Hospital Charity Gala Planning Committee. She specifically requested your involvement because of your business connections. Something about securing corporate sponsorships. Even her humanitarian work was reduced to her utility to others. Amara had built a non-profit organization from nothing, providing business mentorship and microloans to disadvantaged women across 3 states. She had personally funded full scholarships for dozens of first-generation college students, had been featured on local magazine covers for her innovative approaches to economic empowerment, and had received humanitarian awards from organizations across the country. But to Camille, she was simply a useful resource to be deployed when needed. "I'll contact her tomorrow," Amara replied. "Make sure you do. These social obligations are crucial for maintaining the family's standing in the community. We can't have people thinking we don't contribute appropriately. The family's standing." And if Amara hadn't been single-handedly elevating the Harrison name through her business success and philanthropic leadership for years, while Zara posed for cameras. The irony was so profound it almost made her laugh. Almost. "Of course, Mother," Amara said, the formal address slipping out automatically. She climbed the stairs to her modest bedroom in the family wing, not a separate suite, but the same room she had occupied since childhood, furnished with pieces that reflected necessity rather than luxury. Her business success had allowed her to lease her own BMW and establish her downtown office. But at home she remained in the space that had always been hers, comfortable but unremarkable, a constant reminder of her position in this family's hierarchy. Through her windows, she could see the gardens where she had played as a child, always alone or trailing behind Zara and Camille, never quite included in their magic circle of 2. She remembered birthday parties where other children would ask why her mother seemed to love Zara more, and her stammered attempts to explain something she had never understood herself. The sound of laughter drifted up from below, Camille and Zara celebrating this latest triumph with the easy intimacy of best friends rather than mother and daughter. That laughter held everything Amara had spent her lifetime craving. Unconditional acceptance, genuine delight in her existence, the warm assumption that she deserved every good thing that came her way. Her phone buzzed with a text from Donovan, her fiancé of 12 months. "Hope your presentation went well today, beautiful. Can't wait to see you tonight for dinner with your family. Love you." She stared at the message, remembering his proposal on the beach in Santorini, the way his eyes had filled with tears when she said yes, the promises he had made about building a future together where she would always come first. Donovan Pierce was everything any woman would want, devastatingly handsome with dark hair and steel-grey eyes, incredibly wealthy from his tech empire, intelligent enough to match her in conversation, and charming enough to make her believe in fairy tales again. But lately she had noticed subtle changes. The way his attention lingered on Zara during family dinners, how he laughed just a little too hard at Zara's stories, the increasing frequency with which he found excuses to visit when Zara would be home, small things that might mean nothing or might mean everything. "Tonight," she whispered to her reflection in the antique mirror, "tonight I'll know for sure." Chapter 2. Words that shatter souls. Some betrayals are so cruel, they rewrite the entire story of your existence, turning every happy memory into evidence of your own foolishness. The evening arrived with the kind of golden light that photographers paid fortunes to capture, streaming through the dining room windows and painting everything in warm amber tones. Amara had chosen her outfit carefully, a midnight blue silk dress that hugged her curves perfectly and brought out the honey flecks in her eyes, paired with the diamond necklace Donovan had given her for their 6-month anniversary. She wanted to look irresistible tonight, wanted to remind him why he had chosen her in the first place. Donovan arrived precisely at 7, carrying white orchids for Camille and a bottle of vintage champagne that probably cost more than most people made in a month. At 32, he possessed the kind of masculine beauty that graced magazine covers, 6 feet 3 inches of lean muscle wrapped in Italian suits, dark hair that always looked perfectly tousled, and grey eyes that could shift from storm clouds to summer sky, depending on his mood. His smile could light up rooms, and had certainly lit up Amara's world when he first turned it on her at a charity auction 18 months ago. "Amara," he said, pulling her close for a kiss that felt warm but somehow distant, "you look absolutely stunning tonight." She searched his face for signs of the passion that used to ignite when he looked at her, but found only appreciation, the kind you might show for a beautiful painting rather than the woman you planned to marry. "Thank you," she replied, leading him into the dining room where Camille and Zara were already waiting. Zara had chosen a flowing white dress that made her look like a Greek goddess, her blonde hair swept into an elegant updo that showcased her graceful neck. She rose to greet Donovan with a smile that seemed to light him up from within. There was the passion Amara had been missing. "Donovan," Zara said warmly, accepting his kiss on her cheek. "I'm so excited to tell you about the Beaumont campaign. I can't wait to hear everything," he replied, his voice carrying an enthusiasm that never quite materialized when discussing Amara's business ventures. Dinner unfolded like a carefully choreographed dance of subtle cruelties. Camille dominated the conversation, steering every topic toward Zara's modeling career, her upcoming photo shoots, her growing social media following. When Amara mentioned her latest business triumph, the regional expansion that would double her company's revenue, the conversation shifted within minutes back to Zara's upcoming magazine covers. "You know, Donovan," Camille said over dessert, her voice taking on that conspiratorial tone that always preceded her most calculated statements. "Zara has always been interested in business. She has such a natural understanding of marketing and brand development. Perhaps you could give her some advice about leveraging her modeling success into other ventures. Donovan's eyes lit up with genuine interest. I'd love to help however I can. You definitely have the charisma and intelligence to build something beyond modeling. Amara watched this exchange with growing unease, noting how Donovan leaned toward Zara when she spoke, how his laughter came easier with her, how his whole demeanor seemed more relaxed and natural. With Amara, conversations often felt like intellectual exercises, discussions about market strategies or economic theory. With Zara, he smiled like a man remembering what it felt like to simply enjoy someone's company. I should probably get going soon, Amara said quietly. I have an early morning conference call with potential European partners. Always working, Camille said, with that particular smile that looked supportive but felt like criticism. And Zara, tell Donovan about the photographer who wants to do that artistic series with you. As her sister launched into another story, Amara excused herself to use the powder room. The hallway felt cooler than usual, shadows seeming to reach toward her as she walked. She was returning to the dining room when voices from the study stopped her in her tracks. Really think this through, Donovan, Camille was saying, her voice urgent and persuasive. Marriage is about more than business partnerships or intellectual compatibility. I know, Mrs. Harrison, but please call me Camille. We're going to be family soon, one way or another. A pause. Amara is certainly accomplished, I'll give her that. But she's also difficult, stubborn, and frankly not the easiest person to love. She's always been too intense, too demanding. Marriage requires compromise, sweetness, the ability to make a man feel like a man rather than a business associate. Amara pressed her back against the wall, her heart beginning to race. I've been thinking the same thing, Donovan admitted, his voice heavy with what sounded like relief at finally being able to voice doubts he had been harboring. At first, her ambition was attractive. I thought I wanted a partner who could match my success. But now I realize that what I need is someone who makes life easier, not more complicated. Someone who makes me feel like I'm coming home, not going to another board meeting. Exactly, Camille continued. Now Zara understands how to make people happy. She's warm, spontaneous, genuinely delightful to be around. She doesn't compete with the men in her life. She complements them. And let's be honest about something else, shall we?
What's that?
Looks matter, Donovan. They shouldn't, but they do, especially for a man in your position. You'll be photographed constantly, attending galas and charity events, appearing in magazines. Zara has the kind of beauty that photographs well, that makes other men envious rather than questioning your choices. The words hit Amara like physical blows. Her mother was calling her ugly, not directly, but with the kind of subtle cruelty that left no room for misinterpretation. You're saying Amara isn't beautiful? Donovan asked. I'm saying beauty comes in many forms, and some forms are more conventional than others, more universally appealing. Zara has that timeless classic beauty that never goes out of style. She's the kind of woman who makes other women want to be her friend, and other men wish they were you. And Amara? Amara is striking in her own way, but she's also intimidating. Men don't like feeling intimidated by their wives, Donovan. They want to feel needed, appreciated, adored. When was the last time Amara made you feel like her hero rather than her business partner? The silence stretched long enough for Amara to hear her own heartbeat echoing in her ears. You're right, Donovan said finally. I love Amara, but I'm not sure I'm in love with her anymore. With Zara, I feel lighter, happier, more like the man I want to be. Love isn't always enough, darling. You need compatibility, shared values, the ability to build a life that brings joy rather than constant challenge. Zara would worship you the way a wife should worship her husband. She would make your house a home, not a headquarters. But what about Amara? She's your daughter. Don't you want her to be happy? Camille's laugh was soft but cutting. Amara will be fine. She's built for solitude, really. All that fierce independence, that need to prove herself constantly. It's exhausting for everyone around her. She'll throw herself into her work, and probably convince herself she's better off alone. Some women are meant for marriage and family, and others are meant for careers and achievements. Amara has always been the latter. You really think Zara would be interested in me? I mean, she could have anyone. Oh, sweetheart, she's been half in love with you since the day you two met. She's just too sweet and loyal to say anything while you were engaged to her sister. But if you were free, I think you'd be amazed at how quickly she would say yes. Amara's legs nearly gave out beneath her. The betrayal was complete, not just from her fiancé, but from the mother who was supposed to protect her and the sister she had spent her lifetime supporting and defending. I need to think about this, Donovan said. Of course you do. Just remember, life is short and happiness is rare. You deserve to spend your days with someone who makes you feel like the best version of yourself, and that someone might not be the person you originally thought she was. Footsteps moved toward the door. Amara fled up the stairs to her room, her heart hammering against her ribs and her vision blurring with unshed tears. She barely made it to her bathroom before the sobs began, deep, wrenching sounds that came from a place of pain she had never fully acknowledged before. Every doubt she had ever had about her worth, every insecurity she had battled, every moment of feeling like she was too much or not enough, it all crystallized into this one devastating truth. Even the people who were supposed to love her unconditionally found her fundamentally unlovable. She stared at herself in the mirror, seeing not the successful businesswoman who had built a thriving company, not the humanitarian who had changed thousands of lives, but the unwanted daughter who had never been enough for anyone. Her mother's words echoed in her mind. Too intense, too demanding, not the easiest person to love. Maybe they were right. Maybe she was meant to be alone. But even as the tears fell, something else began to kindle in her chest, a spark of the same determination that had built her business, that had survived years of emotional neglect, that had turned her into someone worth knowing, even if her own family couldn't see it. If they thought she was difficult now, they had no idea what she was capable of when she stopped trying to earn love that was never going to be freely given. Tomorrow, she whispered to her reflection, tomorrow I start living for myself. Chapter 3. The Silent Revolution. True power is born in the moments when you choose to rise instead of break, when you transform betrayal into the fuel for your own magnificent becoming. The morning sun painted Amara's bedroom in shades of gold and copper, but she had been awake long before dawn, staring at the ceiling and making silent promises to herself. The tears had dried hours ago, leaving behind something far more dangerous than sadness: clarity. For the first time in 28 years, she saw the game that had been played around her, and she finally understood the rules. She rose from her bed like a queen preparing for battle, choosing her armor carefully. The navy blue Armani suit fit her like liquid confidence. The crisp white silk blouse opened just enough to hint at feminine power without apology. Her makeup was flawless but subtle, her hair swept into a sophisticated chignon that showcased her graceful neck. She looked in the mirror and saw not the rejected daughter, but the formidable woman she was becoming. Breakfast was already underway when she descended the staircase, her heels clicking against marble with the rhythm of a warrior's march. Camille and Zara sat at the sun-drenched table, both still glowing from last night's successful manipulation, unaware that their victim had overheard every calculated word. "Good morning," Amara said pleasantly, settling into her chair with the fluid grace that had always marked her movements. "Oh, good. You're up early," Camille replied without looking up from her newspaper. "Mrs. Whitman expects your call by 10 about the charity gala. Make sure you mention our family's previous contributions when you speak with potential sponsors." "Of course," Amara agreed, buttering her toast with steady hands. "Anything else I can handle for the family today?" Something in her tone made Zara glance up from her phone. "Are you okay? You seem different this morning." "Different," If only she knew how different everything was now that the blindfold had been removed. "I'm perfect," Amara replied, her smile genuine for the first time in months. "Actually, I wanted to let you both know about some exciting developments with my business." She had their attention now. Camille's newspaper lowering slightly, Zara's eyes curious. The regional expansion exceeded all projections. "We're opening offices in 3 additional cities within the next 6 months, and the investors are calling it the most successful launch in our industry this quarter." "That's wonderful, dear," Camille said automatically, already reaching for her newspaper again. "There's more," Amara continued smoothly. "I've been invited to speak at the Southern Women's Business Summit next month. They want me to deliver the keynote address on innovative consulting strategies." This time, Camille's attention was fully captured. The Southern Women's Business Summit was exactly the kind of prestigious event that elevated entire families in social circles. "A keynote address?" she repeated. "The theme is Building Empires, the New Generation of Female Leadership. They're featuring my expansion strategy as a case study for other entrepreneurs." Amara watched her mother's expression shift as the implications sank in. This kind of recognition would elevate the Harrison name in ways that modeling campaigns never could. "Well," Camille said carefully, "that's quite an achievement." "Thank you," Amara replied graciously. "I should probably mention that Atlanta Business Chronicle wants to do a feature story about the expansion. Something about following the journey of young female CEOs who are reshaping the consulting landscape." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Even Zara seemed to recognize the magnitude of what her sister was describing, the kind of recognition that made modeling campaigns look modest by comparison. Her phone buzzed with a text from Donovan. "Can we talk later today? There's something important I need to discuss with you." She stared at the message, imagining his internal struggle, the war between obligation and desire that was probably keeping him awake at night. Poor Donovan, torn between the woman he should want and the woman he actually wanted. She almost felt sorry for him. "That must be Donovan," Camille said, noticing her attention to the phone. "You two are so fortunate to have found each other." The irony was breathtaking. Camille had spent last evening systematically dismantling Amara's relationship, and now she was offering platitudes about their good fortune. "We are indeed fortunate," Amara agreed, "though I sometimes wonder if fortune has more surprises in store for all of us." After breakfast, she drove to her downtown office in the leased BMW that represented her growing success. The Harrison Business Solutions headquarters occupied 3 floors of a gleaming glass tower, employing 65 people who looked to her for leadership and vision. Here, in this space she had built from nothing, she was not the unwanted daughter or the difficult fiancée. She was simply Amara Harrison, the brilliant strategist who had revolutionized business consulting for the digital age. Her assistant, Miranda, greeted her with the usual stack of urgent messages and priority meetings, but today Amara felt different walking through these halls. The weight of trying to earn love she would never receive had lifted from her shoulders, replaced by the exhilarating lightness of finally accepting who she truly was. "Clear my calendar for lunch," she told Miranda. "I have some important calls to make." The first call was to Mrs. Whitman about the charity gala. But instead of simply offering to secure sponsors, Amara proposed something bigger. Harrison Business Solutions would sponsor the entire Children's Wing fundraising campaign, creating an initiative that would raise 5 times the usual amount for the hospital. She would personally oversee every detail, ensuring that the Harrison name was associated with unprecedented generosity and flawless execution. The second call was to the Atlanta Business Chronicle, accepting the feature story request she had previously declined and scheduling interviews that would establish her as the new voice of business innovation in the South. The third call was to her personal lawyer, reviewing the prenuptial agreement she and Donovan had signed. Not because she expected to need it soon, but because preparation was the foundation of all power. By afternoon, she had restructured 2 client campaigns, approved the design for her $3 million Southeast expansion project, and scheduled meetings with investors who wanted to fund her growth into additional markets. Her phone continued buzzing with messages from Donovan, increasingly urgent requests to meet, to talk, to work through some things together. She waited until 5 o'clock to respond. Dinner tonight at Chez Laurent, 7:30. Chez Laurent was their place, the restaurant where he had first told her he loved her, where they had celebrated her business victories and planned their future together. It seemed appropriate for whatever conversation he thought he needed to have. She arrived first, wearing a black cocktail dress that hugged her curves and reminded everyone who saw her that she was a woman who commanded attention without begging for it. The maitre d' led her to their usual table, the intimate corner booth where they had shared so many meaningful conversations about building a life together. Donovan arrived 10 minutes late, which was unusual for him, his expression carrying the weight of whatever decision he had reached. He looked handsome as always in his charcoal grey suit, but there was something diminished about him, as if the conflict between desire and duty had worn away some of his usual confidence. "Amara," he said, leaning down to kiss her cheek. "You look beautiful." "Thank you," she replied, studying his face as he settled across from her. "You said you had something important to discuss." He shifted uncomfortably, his hands fidgeting with his wine glass. "I've been doing a lot of thinking since last night." "About what?" About us. About our future. About whether we're really right for each other." There it was, the conversation that would have devastated her 24 hours ago, but now felt like watching a predictable movie play out exactly as expected. "Go on," she said calmly. "I love you, Amara. I want you to know that. But I'm not sure we want the same things from life. You're so driven, so focused on your career. Sometimes I feel like I'm competing with your ambition for your attention." She almost laughed at the irony. Her ambition was one of the things that had initially attracted him, back when her success had reflected well on his taste in women. But now that Zara offered an easier alternative, suddenly her drive was a problem. "I see," she said. "And what is it you think you want instead?" He had the grace to look ashamed. "I think we both deserve to be with someone who makes us feel complete, someone who brings out the best in us without it feeling like work." "Someone like Zara." The color drained from his face. "What? Did you really think I wouldn't notice, Donovan? The way you light up when she walks into a room, the way you hang on her every word, the way you've been pulling away from me for months while finding excuses to spend more time with her." He opened his mouth to deny it, then closed it again, apparently realizing that lies would only make this worse. "I never meant for this to happen," he said quietly. "But it did happen. And now you want permission to act on it. Amara, you want to know something interesting?" She interrupted, her voice steady and almost conversational. "Last night, I overheard you and my mother discussing how much more suitable Zara would be as your wife, how much more beautiful, more conventional, more willing to worship you the way you deserve to be worshipped." His face went from pale to flushed in seconds. "You heard that?" "Every word, including the part where my own mother called me too intense, too demanding, and not easy to love." "I'm sorry," he whispered. "We never meant for you to hear that." "Oh, I'm not sorry I heard it. It was exactly what I needed to understand some fundamental truths about my life." She leaned forward, her eyes meeting his directly. "You're free, Donovan. Free to pursue the easier love, the uncomplicated adoration, the woman who will make you feel like a hero without challenging you to actually become one. I won't stand in your way." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that you're right. We do deserve to be with someone who brings out our best. The difference is I now realize that person was never going to be you." She stood up gracefully. leaving him staring after her with a mixture of relief and something that might have been regret. "The ring is in the jewelry box on my dresser," she said. "I assume you'll want to have it resized for smaller fingers." As she walked away, her heels clicking against marble, with the sound of a woman who had finally learned her worth, she heard him call her name. But she didn't turn around. Some bridges were meant to be burned, and she was just getting started with the fire. Chapter 4. Becoming Extraordinary. Grace is not given. It is earned through pain transformed into power, through betrayal alchemized into unshakable self-worth. 3 months after that defining dinner at Chez Laurent, Amara had used every single day to reconstruct herself from the ground up. Not because she was broken, she was beginning to understand that she had never been broken, but because she was finally ready to stop, dimming her light for people who preferred her shadows. The Atlanta Business Chronicle feature had been everything she hoped and more. The photograph captured her in her downtown office, power suit immaculate, hands folded confidently as she gazed directly into the camera with eyes that revealed nothing and promised everything. The innovator, how Amara Harrison built a business empire, while everyone was looking elsewhere, had generated dozens of interview requests, speaking engagements and business opportunities that were transforming her from regional success to national recognition. More importantly, it had generated something she had never experienced before, recognition from her family that maybe, possibly, they had underestimated her significance. Her morning routine had evolved into something that felt like meditation. She rose at 5, spent an hour in her private gym working her body into the kind of strength that showed in her posture, then reviewed market reports while her chef prepared breakfast. By 7, she was dressed and ready to conquer whatever challenges the day might bring, armored in Italian silk and unshakable confidence. Today's armor was a deep emerald dress that made her skin glow like burnished gold, paired with the diamond earrings she had bought herself to celebrate securing her $2 million regional expansion contract. She no longer waited for gifts from men who might withdraw their affection at any moment. Her jewelry box was filled with treasures she had chosen for herself, each one a reminder that she was her own source of beauty and worth. The Harrison estate felt different when she walked through its halls now. She no longer moved like an apologetic ghost. She strode through the corridors with the confidence of someone who had built something meaningful. The portraits of previous Harrison generations seemed to nod approvingly at this woman who carried herself with the dignity their legacy deserved. "Good morning," she said, entering the breakfast room where Camille sat reading the Wall Street Journal. Her mother looked up, and Amara caught something new in her expression, a flicker of uncertainty, as if Camille was beginning to recalculate the dynamics of their relationship. "Good morning, dear," Camille replied. "I see the Business Journal picked up your Chronicle interview. Very impressive coverage." The words were offered like a peace treaty from someone who was beginning to realize they might have backed the wrong horse. "Thank you," Amara said, settling into her chair with fluid grace. "Where's Zara this morning?" "Undul photo shoot in Miami. The cosmetics campaign is expanding to print advertising." Camille's voice carried less enthusiasm than usual when discussing Zara's career, as if she was starting to understand that modeling campaigns were footnotes compared to building business empires. "Wonderful for her," Amara replied genuinely. Despite everything, she had never been able to summon real anger toward her sister. Zara was as much a victim of Camille's manipulation as she was, raised to believe that beauty was her only currency, and men like Donovan were the highest prizes she could win. "Actually, Camille continued carefully, "I wanted to discuss something with you. The Hartwell Foundation has asked me to join their board, and they specifically mentioned that having you as a family member would be a significant asset to their fundraising efforts." There it was, the first crack in the facade. Camille needed Amara now, needed her success and connections to maintain her own social standing. The unwanted daughter had become an asset worth courting. "I'm sure they mentioned that," Amara agreed pleasantly. "What did you tell them?" That I would discuss it with you, of course. Family decisions should be made together. Family decisions. How interesting that Camille suddenly believed in collaborative family decision-making, now that Amara's decisions affected her own opportunities. "I appreciate that," Amara said. "Send me the details and I'll consider it." Consider it. Not automatically agree, not defer to her mother's judgment, but consider it on her own terms. The shift in power was subtle, but unmistakable. After breakfast, she drove to the downtown community center where she volunteered twice a week, teaching business skills to women transitioning out of poverty. This work had begun as a way to give back, but had evolved into the source of her deepest satisfaction. The women in her program came from backgrounds that made Amara's emotional deprivation seem trivial by comparison. Single mothers working multiple jobs to feed their children, immigrants navigating systems designed to exclude them, survivors of domestic violence rebuilding their lives from nothing. Yet week after week, she watched them transform their circumstances through sheer determination and the practical skills she taught them. "Miss Harrison," called out Lucia, one of her most dedicated students, as she entered the classroom. "I got the loan. The bank approved my application for the catering business." Amara's face broke into a genuine smile, the kind that had become more frequent as she learned to find joy in victories that had nothing to do with her family's approval. "Lucia, that's incredible," she said, embracing the woman who had gone from sleeping in shelters to preparing to launch her own company. "You did this entirely through your own hard work." "I couldn't have done it without what you taught me about business plans and financial projections," Lucia insisted. "You changed my life." These were the moments that mattered, not magazine covers or board positions, but the tangible proof that her knowledge and resources could create real change in real lives. The women in this program saw her clearly, valued her for her mind and her generosity, never questioned whether she was worthy of respect or love. Her afternoon was consumed by meetings with clients who sought her expertise in navigating complex market challenges. Harrison Business Solutions had become synonymous with innovative thinking and flawless execution, and her calendar stayed booked months in advance, with companies willing to pay premium rates for her insights. During a brief break between appointments, her assistant Miranda knocked and entered looking slightly flustered. "There's someone here to see you," she said. "He doesn't have an appointment, but he says it's personal." "Who is it?" "Donovan Pierce." Amara felt a flutter of something, not the heartbreak she might have expected, but curiosity. What could he possibly want to discuss now, 6 months after their relationship ended? "Send him in," she said. He appeared in her doorway looking less polished than she remembered, his usually perfect hair slightly mussed, his expensive suit wrinkled as if he had been wearing it for days. Most surprisingly, his confident bearing had been replaced by something that looked almost like desperation. "Amara," he said, "thank you for seeing me." "Of course. Please sit down." He settled into the chair across from her desk, his eyes taking in the awards on her walls, the flowers from grateful clients, the photographs of her with business leaders and community organizers. "You look incredible," he said. "Success suits you. Thank you. How can I help you today?" He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she remembered from moments when he was struggling with difficult decisions. "I made a mistake," he said simply. "The biggest mistake of my life. I see. Zara and it's not working. It's not what I thought it would be." Amara leaned back in her chair, studying him with the detached interest of a scientist observing a predictable chemical reaction. "What did you think it would be?" "Easy, comfortable, uncomplicated," he laughed bitterly. "And it is all of those things. But it's also empty. There's no depth, no challenge, no growth. I feel like I'm sleepwalking through my own life." And you think this is my problem how? I think I was an idiot to give up the most remarkable woman I've ever known because I was intimidated by her strength. She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city skyline, where her success was literally changing the landscape. Several buildings under construction displayed signs for Harrison Business Solutions, proof of the empire she was building, while he was discovering that easy love was often worthless love. "You're probably right," she said, without turning around. "You are an idiot, but that doesn't mean your realization changes anything. Amara, please. I know I hurt you, but I also know that what we had was real. It was challenging and complicated and sometimes difficult, but it was real in a way that nothing else has ever been." She turned to face him, her expression calm and composed. "What we had was real," she agreed. "But what you chose was easier. And now that easier has revealed itself to be emptier, you want to come back to real." "Yes. The problem, Donovan, is that I'm not the same woman you left. I'm not sitting around waiting for you to decide I'm worth loving. I'm not holding space in my life for someone who chose my sister over me because she seemed more convenient. I know that. I can see that you've grown, changed, become even more incredible than you were before." "I haven't grown or changed," she corrected. "I've simply stopped pretending to be smaller than I am to make other people comfortable." She walked back to her desk, her heels clicking with the authority of someone who had finally learned to take up all the space she deserved. "I'm not angry with you anymore," she continued. "I'm grateful to you, actually. You forced me to stop looking for validation from people who were never going to give it freely. You helped me discover that I don't need anyone's permission to be extraordinary. So there's no chance for us?" She smiled, and he seemed to recognize something in that smile. Not cruelty, but a kind of benevolent finality. "You're going to find someone who's right for you," she said. "Someone who will appreciate the kind of comfortable love you're looking for. But that someone isn't me, and it never was." He nodded slowly, accepting defeat with more grace than she had expected. "For what it's worth," he said as he stood to leave, "I hope you find someone who deserves you." "I already have," she replied. "I found myself." After he left, she sat in the gathering twilight of her office, surrounded by the tangible proof of her worth, and felt something she had never experienced before, complete satisfaction with her own company. She was no longer the daughter seeking approval, or the fiancé trying to be worthy of love. She was simply Amara Harrison, and that was more than enough. Chapter 5. The Light They Cannot Dim. No amount of hatred can extinguish a soul that refuses to stop shining, especially when that soul finally understands its own luminescence. The Hartwell Foundation's annual charity gala was the kind of event that defined Atlanta's social season. 500 of the city's most influential people gathering in the Georgian Terrace hotels, grand ballroom to see and be seen, while raising money for children's literacy programs. Amara had attended for years as Camille's dutiful daughter, always impeccably dressed, but somehow invisible among the sea of carefully curated social climbers. Tonight was different. Tonight she arrived as the evening's keynote speaker, the woman whose business empire and philanthropic efforts had made her the Foundation's natural choice to address their most important fundraising event of the year. She stepped out of her midnight blue Maserati, wearing a gown that would be remembered for years to come, liquid gold silk that seemed to have been poured over her curves, the fabric catching light with every movement and making her skin glow like burnished bronze. The dress was a masterpiece of engineering and artistry, custom designed by a celebrated designer who had proclaimed her a goddess who needed a gown worthy of worship. Her hair cascaded down her back in loose waves that caught the light like black silk, and her makeup was flawless but subtle, emphasizing her natural beauty rather than masking it. The jewelry was equally stunning, a diamond necklace that had once belonged to a successful businesswoman from the 1920s, earrings that sparkled like captured starlight, and a bracelet that whispered of earned success and personal power. She moved up the red carpet with the fluid confidence of someone who had finally learned to take up all the space she deserved, ignoring the flash of cameras and murmur of voices as people tried to place the woman who commanded attention without seeming to seek it. "Amara Harrison," she heard someone whisper. "The one from the Chronicle. They say she's building a business empire that will rival anything in the South." "She's even more beautiful in person," came another voice. "I heard 3 different networks are competing to produce a documentary about her success story." Inside the ballroom, she was immediately surrounded by people who had never bothered to learn her name in previous years, but now competed for her attention. Business leaders wanted to discuss partnerships, socialites angled for invitations to her events, and politicians sought her endorsement for their campaigns. She navigated these conversations with practiced grace, giving each person exactly the amount of attention they deserved while keeping her true focus on the reason she was here to raise money for children who deserved better opportunities than the world had naturally provided them. From across the room, she spotted familiar figures. Camille stood near the bar in an elegant black gown, her usual confident bearing slightly diminished as she watched her daughter command the kind of respect she had never received herself. Beside her, Zara looked ethereal in flowing white silk, her beauty undeniable but somehow less luminous than it had seemed before, as if standing in Amara's radiance had revealed her light to be more reflected than generated. And there, looking uncomfortable in his perfectly tailored tuxedo, stood Donovan. His eyes found hers across the crowded room, and she saw in them the regret of a man who had traded gold for copper and was only now beginning to understand the magnitude of his mistake. "Ladies and gentlemen," the foundation president announced from the podium, "please welcome our keynote speaker, businesswoman and philanthropist, Amara Harrison." The applause was thunderous as she made her way to the stage, her gown flowing behind her like liquid starlight. She took the podium with the confidence of someone who had earned the right to speak to rooms full of powerful people about changing the world. "Good evening," she began, her voice carrying easily through the room without seeming to strain. "I want to tell you about a little girl who grew up in a beautiful house, surrounded by every material advantage, but who went to bed hungry every night, not for food, but for the simple understanding that she mattered." The room fell completely silent, everyone sensing that they were about to hear something more than the usual charitable platitudes. That little girl spent years trying to earn love through achievement, believing that if she could just be smart enough, successful enough, perfect enough, she would finally be worthy of the affection that seemed to flow so easily to everyone around her. She paused, her eyes finding Camille's across the room. It took her 28 years to understand that love is not a prize to be won through performance. It is a gift that either flows freely or doesn't flow at all. And when it doesn't flow, the problem is never with the one being denied. It's with the one doing the denying. The silence in the room was profound, as if 500 people were collectively holding their breath. Tonight, we're here to talk about children's literacy, about giving young people the tools they need to write their own stories instead of accepting the roles others have scripted for them. But before we can teach children to read words, we need to teach them to read their own worth. Her speech continued for 20 minutes, weaving together personal revelation and social challenge in a way that left the audience mesmerized. She spoke about building businesses, not just to create wealth, but to create opportunities for others. About using privilege as a platform for lifting up those who had been denied access. About the responsibility that came with having been given advantages, and the greater responsibility that came with having overcome disadvantages. When she finished, the standing ovation lasted for nearly 5 minutes. People wiped tears from their eyes, approached the stage to offer business cards and lunch invitations, and pledged donations that would triple the foundation's usual fundraising total. As the formal program ended and the evening shifted into mingling and dancing, Amara found herself at the center of a constantly shifting group of admirers. Business leaders offered her partnerships that would expand her empire internationally. Celebrities wanted to collaborate on charitable projects. Politicians sought her endorsement for campaigns that could reshape state policy. Through it all, she remained gracious but unimpressed, accepting compliments with the dignity of someone who no longer needed external validation to feel worthy. Amara. She turned to find Zara approaching, her usual confidence replaced by something that looked almost like vulnerability. "That was an incredible speech," Zara said quietly. "I had no idea you felt that way growing up." "You weren't supposed to know," Amara replied gently. "It wasn't your fault that love was rationed in our house, but I was part of it. I accepted all that attention, all that praise, without ever questioning why you weren't getting the same. You were a child. Zara, children accept the love that's offered without analyzing the fairness of the distribution." Zara looked around the room at the crowd still buzzing about Amara's speech, at the obvious respect and admiration directed toward her sister, at the way people seemed to lean toward Amara as if her approval was the only thing that mattered. "I'm starting to understand something I never saw before," Zara said. "What's that?" That being loved easily isn't the same as being respected deeply. Everyone has always adored me, but no one has ever looked at me the way these people are looking at you. And how are they looking at me? Like you're someone who could change the world if you decided it was worth changing." Before Amara could respond, Camille approached, her usual commanding presence somehow diminished in her daughter's radiance. "Amara," she said carefully, "I wanted to tell you how proud I am of your success." The words hung in the air like a foreign language neither of them quite knew how to speak. "Thank you," Amara replied simply. "I realize I may not have always been as supportive as I should have been," Camille continued, the admission clearly costing her significant effort. "Perhaps I didn't understand what you were capable of achieving." "Perhaps not," Amara agreed, her voice carrying no malice but also no forgiveness. Some wounds were too deep and too long in the making to be healed with belated recognition. "I was wondering if you might consider joining me for lunch this week. There are some business opportunities I'd like to discuss with you." Business opportunities. Even now, even in this moment of closest approach to an apology, Camille couldn't resist treating her daughter like a resource to be leveraged rather than a person to be loved. "I'll check my calendar and have my assistant contact you," Amara replied with professional courtesy. As her family members drifted away to process this new version of the daughter and sister they thought they knew, Amara stood surrounded by strangers who saw her more clearly than the people who had raised her. "Miss Harrison?" She turned to find a distinguished gentleman approaching, his silver hair and warm brown eyes suggesting intelligence and kindness in equal measure. "I'm Dr. Jeremiah Wright," he said, extending his hand. "I run the pediatric oncology program at Children's Healthcare. Your speech tonight was extraordinary." "Thank you, Dr. Wright. I'm familiar with your work. The childhood cancer treatment protocols you've developed are revolutionary." His face lit up with surprise and pleasure. "You know my research? I make it my business to know the people who are doing meaningful work in this city." They talked for nearly an hour about child development, trauma recovery, and the intersection of emotional healing and educational achievement. He was brilliant and passionate, dedicated to helping children overcome the kind of emotional neglect that Amara understood intimately. "I'd love to continue this conversation sometime," he said as the evening wound down. "Perhaps over dinner." She looked into his eyes and saw something she hadn't encountered in years: genuine interest in her mind, her work, her vision for making the world better. Not the kind of attraction that was based on beauty or wealth or social status, but the deeper recognition that came when one meaningful person recognized another. "I'd like that very much," she said. As she drove home through the quiet streets of Atlanta, her gown pooled around her in the leather seats of her car. She reflected on how completely her life had transformed. 8 months ago, she had been begging for scraps of affection from people who saw her as insufficient. Tonight, she had commanded a room full of the city's most powerful people and attracted the attention of a man who valued her for all the qualities her own family had found threatening. The girl who had once felt like a stranger in her own home had become a woman who felt at home in her own skin. And that transformation was more valuable than any empire she could build or any love she could win. She was finally, completely, magnificently herself. Chapter 6. The First Crack in the Foundation. Even the most loyal soldiers eventually question why they're fighting a war that benefits no one, especially when they discover the enemy was always within their own ranks. The Harrison estate felt different in the weeks following the charity gala, as if the very foundations had shifted beneath the weight of unspoken truths finally given voice. Amara moved through the halls with newfound authority, her presence no longer that of a supplicant seeking approval, but of an heiress who had finally claimed her birthright. She was in her modest bedroom, reviewing contracts for her $3 million Southeast expansion when her assistant called from the office. "Miss Harrison, I have some interesting news," Miranda said, barely containing excitement in her professional tone. "Southern Business Magazine wants to feature you in their Leaders Under 30 issue. The editor called personally to request an interview." Amara set down her pen, absorbing the magnitude of this recognition. Southern Business Magazine represented regional acknowledgement of influence and impact, the kind of platform that transformed successful business people into cultural icons. "Schedule it," she said, "and make sure they have access to all our recent expansion data. I want them to understand the full scope of what we're building." After ending the call, she realized she was no longer surprised by such opportunities. Success had become her natural habitat, and recognition was simply the inevitable result of excellence sustained over time. The sound of footsteps in the hallway drew her attention. Through her partially open door, she could see Zara pacing back and forth, her phone pressed to her ear, her usually melodious voice tight with frustration. "I understand the timeline is aggressive," Zara was saying, "but I need to know where I stand. Other agencies are interested, and I can't wait indefinitely for a decision that may never come." Amara frowned. In all their years together, she had never heard her sister sound anything other than confident about her modeling career. The uncertainty in Zara's voice was entirely foreign to her usual persona. The conversation continued for several more minutes, with Zara's responses becoming increasingly strained. When she finally hung up, she stood in the hallway for a long moment, her shoulders sagging with what looked like defeat. "Zara?" Amara called softly. "Is everything all right?" Her sister appeared in the doorway, her perfect features marred by worry lines that seemed to have appeared overnight. "Oh," Zara said, attempting to summon her usual bright smile and failing completely. "I didn't realize you were home. I'm working from here today. What's going on? You look upset." For a moment, Zara seemed to consider deflecting with casual conversation, but something in Amara's genuine concern seemed to break through her defenses. "The cosmetics campaign," she said quietly. "They're reconsidering the direction of their marketing strategy. What does that mean?" "It means they want someone with broader appeal and deeper market recognition, someone whose name carries weight beyond just modeling." Amara understood immediately. In the aftermath of her highly publicized success, Marketing executives were beginning to recognize that consumers were more interested in substance than just beauty, in stories of achievement rather than simple aesthetics. "I'm sorry," she said, meaning it completely. "That must be disappointing." "It's more than disappointing," Zara said, her careful composure finally cracking. "It's terrifying. This was supposed to be my breakout moment, the campaign that would establish me internationally. Without it—" She didn't finish the sentence, but Amara could hear the fear beneath the words. Zara was 25, which was approaching the upper limits of commercial modeling viability. Without major campaigns to sustain her momentum, her career could stagnate or decline rapidly. "There will be other opportunities," Amara offered. "Will there?" Zara asked, her voice carrying a desperation that seemed to surprise them both. "I'm starting to realize that I might have built my entire identity around something that was never going to last." The admission hung between them like a bridge that had never existed before. One sister acknowledging vulnerability to another who had spent years hiding her own pain. "What do you mean?" Amara asked gently. Zara moved into the study and settled into the chair by the window, her movements lacking their usual fluid grace. "I mean that watching you these past few months has made me understand something I never wanted to face," she said. "You built something that belongs to you, something that can't be taken away by changing trends or aging or someone else's definition of beauty. I've been living on borrowed time and borrowed validation my entire life." Zara: "No, let me finish. I've been thinking about this for weeks, ever since that night at the charity gala, when I watched 500 people hang on your every word. When I saw the way they looked at you, not because you were pretty, but because you were important." Amara remained silent, sensing that her sister needed to voice truths that had been building pressure beneath her perfect exterior. "Mother always told me that beauty was my power," Zara continued. "That men would want me and women would envy me, and that would be enough to build a life on. But power that depends on other people's reactions isn't really power at all, is it? It's just performance." "Beauty is a kind of power," Amara said carefully. "But it's not the only kind, and it's not always the most lasting. That's what I'm starting to understand. You have real power, the kind that comes from building something meaningful, from changing people's lives, from being someone the world needs, rather than just someone the world wants to look at." The conversation was interrupted by the sound of the front door opening, followed by Camille's voice calling out greetings to staff members. "We should probably continue this later," Zara said, her vulnerability already retreating behind practiced social armor. But as she stood to leave, she paused at the door. "Amara, that night, when you overheard Mother and Donovan talking about me being better suited for him?" Tamara's hand stilled on her paperwork. "What about it?" "I knew what she was doing. I knew she was trying to manipulate him into choosing me over you, and I didn't stop it." The admission was so quiet, it was almost a whisper, but it carried the weight of months of suppressed guilt. "I told myself I deserved him because he made me feel special, because having someone like Donovan choose me would prove that I was worth something more than just pretty pictures. But the truth is, I was jealous of what you two had." "Jealous of what?" The way he talked to you about real things, the way he respected your mind, the way he seemed to grow into a better person when he was trying to keep up with your thinking." She laughed bitterly. "With me, he never had to grow. I was easy, uncomplicated, exactly what Mother promised I would be. And now I understand that easy isn't the same as valuable, and I'm starting to hate myself for taking what was never really mine to begin with." After Zara left, Amara sat in her study thinking about the cracks that were beginning to appear in the foundation of their family dynamics. For years, she had assumed that Zara was simply the beloved daughter, while she was the unwanted one. But maybe the truth was more complex than that simple narrative. Maybe Zara had been trapped in her golden cage as completely as Amara had been imprisoned in her shadows. The thought was interrupted by Miranda calling again. this time with news that sent a chill through her entire body. "Miss Harrison, I hope you're sitting down. I've been organizing some old files for the tax audit, and I found something unusual. A box of old papers that was misfiled in the business documents." "What kind of papers?" "Birth certificates, old photographs and letters. The birth certificate has your name on it, but it lists a different father than the man you grew up calling Dad." Amara's hands went completely still on her desk. "What did you say?" "The father listed is someone named Theodore Blackstone. And there are letters, Miss Harrison, dozens of them dating back to just before you were born. They tell quite a story." "Bring them to me," Amara said, her voice steady despite the earthquake beginning in her chest. "Bring them to me immediately." An hour later, she sat surrounded by the debris of everything she had believed about her own life. Photographs showed her mother laughing with a strikingly handsome black man who bore an unmistakable resemblance to Amara herself. The letters told a story of passion, betrayal, and abandonment that explained 28 years of inexplicable hatred. The final letter, dated 3 months before Amara's birth, was written in her biological father's precise handwriting. "Camille, I cannot continue this relationship. My wife has discovered our affair, and Margaret is threatening criminal charges for the money I took. I must choose between prison and my family. I choose them, but please know this is breaking my heart. The child you carry deserves better than a father who is a thief and a coward. I will not be able to acknowledge paternity or provide support, as Margaret demands this as part of avoiding prosecution. I'm sorry for the pain I'm causing you and the child who will never know me. Please forgive me for being too weak to be the man you both deserve. Theodore!" Amara read the letter 3 times, each reading revealing new layers of betrayal and abandonment. Her biological father had not just left. He had actively rejected her before she was even born, had chosen his legitimate family over the daughter he had helped create. Suddenly, 28 years of her mother's inexplicable cruelty made perfect, terrible sense. She was not the unwanted daughter. She was the living reminder of the man who had broken Camille's heart and destroyed her life. But understanding the source of her mother's hatred didn't make it hurt any less. If anything, it hurt more, because now she knew that she had never had a chance at earning the love she had spent her entire life seeking. She had been sentenced to pay for her father's sins before she was even born. Chapter 7. The Sins of the Father. The Past has a way of demanding payment for debts we never knew we owed. But the cruelest creditor is the one who punishes the innocent for crimes they never committed. The private investigator's office occupied a nondescript building in Midtown Atlanta, but William Torres came highly recommended by Amara's corporate attorneys. At 55, he possessed the kind of weathered face that suggested he had seen enough human nature to be unsurprised by any revelation, no matter how devastating. "Miss Harrison," he said, spreading a thick file across his desk, "I've been investigating Theodore Blackstone for the past 2 weeks, as you requested. What I've discovered is complicated." Amara sat perfectly still in the leather chair across from him, her hands folded in her lap, with the composure she had learned to maintain, even when her world was shifting beneath her feet. "Tell me everything," she said. Theodore Blackstone was 32 when he began his affair with your mother in 1995. He was married to Margaret Blackstone, had 2 children, Theodore Jr., who was 12, and Sarah, who was 9. He and his wife owned Blackstone Development, one of the most successful real estate companies in the Southeast. Torres opened a folder containing newspaper clippings and business documents. By all accounts, Theodore was brilliant but ruthless. He built his empire by buying distressed properties, gentrifying neighborhoods, and displacing long-time residents for profit. Your mother was his business partner and marketing director. They worked closely together for 3 years before the affair began. And when it ended, That's where the story gets interesting. According to court documents I was able to access, Margaret Blackstone didn't just discover the affair, she discovered that Theodore had been embezzling company funds to support his relationship with your mother. Expensive gifts, luxury vacations, a downtown apartment where they met. Amara felt her stomach tighten. Her biological father wasn't just an abandoning lover. He was a criminal who had stolen from his own wife to fund his affair. Margaret threatened divorce and criminal charges unless he ended the relationship immediately and turned over his half of the company to her as restitution. When she learned that Camille was pregnant, she demanded that Theodore never acknowledge the child and never provide any financial support. So, he chose his legitimate family over his unborn daughter. He chose avoiding prison over everything else, Torres corrected. Margaret had enough evidence to destroy him completely. He wrote that final letter to your mother under threat of criminal prosecution. Torres opened another folder, revealing more recent documents. Here's where the story gets more complicated. Margaret divorced him anyway, 2 years after you were born. She kept the company and most of their assets. Theodore spent the next decade trying to rebuild his career, but his reputation was destroyed. He remarried in 2008 to a woman named Patricia, but that marriage ended in divorce 5 years later when his drinking and gambling problems became unmanageable. Where is he now? Living in a modest apartment in Birmingham, Alabama. He's 61 years old, works as a part-time real estate agent for a small firm that specializes in low-income housing. His health is poor, diabetes, heart problems, depression. According to his current landlord, he's been asking questions about you for the past several years. What kind of questions? Your business success has been covered in Alabama newspapers. He apparently keeps clippings about your achievements. His landlord says he talks about having a daughter who became successful despite never knowing her father. Torres leaned back in his chair, his expression sympathetic but professional. Ms. Harrison, I need to tell you something else. 3 weeks ago, Theodore Blackstone contacted a law firm in Birmingham about potentially reaching out to you. He's been diagnosed with heart failure, and his doctors have given him less than 2 years to live. The information hit Amara like a physical blow. Her biological father was dying, and he wanted to meet the daughter he had abandoned before she was born. Has he attempted to contact me directly? No, not yet. The lawyer advised him to proceed carefully, given your prominent position and the potential for public scrutiny. Amara spent the drive home, processing information that recontextualized her entire existence. She was not just the unwanted daughter of a heartbroken mother, she was the product of criminal betrayal, embezzlement, and cowardice. Her biological father had stolen money from his wife to fund the affair that created her, then abandoned both his lover and his unborn child to save himself from prison. No wonder Camille had been unable to love her. Every time she looked at Amara, she saw not just the man who had broken her heart, but the man who had stolen from his own family to afford their relationship. The Harrison estate felt different when she arrived home, as if she was seeing it through new eyes. This house, these grounds, the lifestyle she had always known, had any of it been built on money stolen from Theodore's legitimate family? Had Camille used embezzled funds to establish her social position? She found her mother in the conservatory, tending to orchids with the careful attention she had never given to her firstborn daughter. Camille looked up when Amara entered, her expression shifting from casual acknowledgement to wariness as she registered something different in her daughter's bearing. "Good afternoon, dear. You're home early. We need to talk," Amara said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who would not be dismissed or deflected. "About what?" "About Theodore Blackstone." The pruning shears fell from Camille's hands, clattering against the marble floor with a sound that seemed to echo through the sudden silence. "I don't know what you mean," Camille said automatically, but her face had gone pale. "I know everything, Mother. The affair, the embezzlement, the abandonment. I know why you've never been able to love me." Camille sank into one of the wrought iron chairs, her usual composed bearing completely shattered. "How did you find out?" "I hired an investigator. I found the letters, the photographs, the birth certificate. I know that every time you look at me, you see the man who destroyed your life." For a long moment, they sat in silence, broken only by the gentle splash of the fountain and the distant sound of traffic beyond the estate grounds. "I was 23 when I met him," Camille said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I thought I knew everything about love, about business, about protecting myself from men who would use me. But he was different. Indeed, he was brilliant and ambitious, and he made me feel like I was the only woman in the world who could match his vision for what we could build together." Her laugh was bitter. "I believed we were partners in every sense of the word, until his wife discovered the affair, until I discovered that everything he had given me, the apartment, the jewelry, the vacations, had been stolen from his wife, that the man I loved was not just unfaithful, but a criminal who was willing to destroy his own family to fund our relationship." Camille looked directly at Amara for the first time in years without flinching. "When Margaret Blackstone confronted me, she told me exactly what kind of man I had fallen in love with. She showed me bank statements, credit card records, evidence that he had been systematically stealing from their business to afford the lifestyle he was providing me. She said I was nothing more than an expensive whore who had helped him rob his own children's future. And then you discovered you were pregnant. And then I discovered that the child I was carrying was the product of criminal betrayal, that every dollar he had spent on our relationship had been stolen from his legitimate children." Tears were streaming down Camille's face now. 28 years of buried pain finally finding expression. "I tried to love you," she whispered. "I swear I tried. But every time I looked at your face, I saw his face. Every time you smiled, I remembered the way he smiled when he was lying to me. Every time you showed the same intelligence, the same ambition, the same ability to charm people into giving you what you wanted. I remembered that those were the same qualities he had used to destroy my life. So you decided to destroy mine instead. I decided to protect Zara from becoming what I had been, a woman who believed in love more than she believed in her own judgment, a woman who could be convinced to participate in her own destruction because a charming man made her feel special." Amara stood up, pacing to the windows that overlooked the gardens where she had played alone as a child. "You punished me for his crimes," she said. "You spent 28 years making me pay for sins I never committed." "I know," Camille said simply, "and I know it was wrong. But I didn't know how to separate you from him in my mind. I didn't know how to love the child without remembering the father. He wants to meet me." Camille's head snapped up. "What? He's dying. Heart failure. He has less than 2 years to live, and he wants to meet the daughter he abandoned." "You can't," Camille said immediately. "Amara, please. He's a selfish man who will only bring you pain. You mean like the selfish woman who raised me?" The words hung between them like a blade, cutting through decades of pretense and careful politeness. "Perhaps," Camille said quietly. "Perhaps I have no right to protect you from anyone." Amara turned from the windows, studying the woman who had given birth to her but had never truly been her mother. "I'm going to meet him," she said. "Not because I want a relationship with him, but because I need to understand the complete story of where I came from." "And after you meet him?" "After I meet him, I'm going to forgive him. Not for his sake, but for mine. I'm going to forgive you too, eventually, but not today. Today, I'm just going to stop carrying the weight of your pain and his cowardice." As she walked toward the door, Camille called out to her, "Amara?" She turned. "For what it's worth, you became everything I was too afraid to become. You built something that belongs only to you, something that no man can steal or destroy. You became the woman I might have been if I had been stronger. I became the woman I had to become to survive being your daughter, Amara replied. That's not the same thing. But as she walked through the halls of the house where she had spent 28 years seeking love that would never come, she realized something had shifted. The truth about her parentage hadn't made the pain go away, but it had finally freed her from the impossible task of earning approval from someone who had been programmed to withhold it. She was no longer the unwanted daughter. She was simply a woman who had been born into circumstances beyond her control and had chosen to transform those circumstances into strength. And that, finally, was enough. Chapter 8. Breaking the Chains of the Past. Understanding your mother's pain doesn't excuse her cruelty, but it explains why love felt like a foreign language in your house, and why you had to teach yourself to speak it fluently. The Birmingham skyline stretched before Amara as her driver navigated through streets that bore no resemblance to the affluent neighborhoods she had grown up knowing. Theodore Blackstone lived in a modest apartment complex that had seen better decades, its red brick facade weathered by Alabama summers and winters that had stripped away any pretense of grandeur. She sat in the back seat of her car, dressed in a simple black suit that conveyed respect without suggesting wealth, her hands folded carefully over a manila folder containing every piece of information the private investigator had gathered about the man she had come to meet. "We can turn around," her driver said quietly, noticing her stillness. "You don't have to do this today." "Yes, I do," she replied, her voice steady despite the earthquake of emotion building in her chest. "I've spent 28 years not knowing where half of myself came from. It's time to fill in the blanks." Apartment 3B was at the end of a narrow hallway that smelled of industrial carpet and the kind of air freshener that never quite masked the underlying sense of lives lived in small spaces. She stood before the door for a long moment, gathering the courage that had carried her through boardroom presentations and hostile negotiations, reminding herself that this conversation was just another kind of business meeting. Her knock was answered by a man who was unmistakably her biological father, though time and poor health had carved deep lines around features that still resembled her own. Theodore Blackstone at 61 was tall and lean like she was, with the same honey-colored eyes and the same aristocratic cheekbones that had always made her feel like she belonged to some other family entirely. "Amara," he said, her name spoken like a prayer he had been practicing for years. "Mr. Blackstone." He stepped aside to let her into an apartment that was clean but sparse, furnished with pieces that suggested limited resources but careful attention to dignity. The walls were covered with newspaper clippings about her business success, magazine covers featuring her face, photographs printed from internet articles about her philanthropic work. "I've been following your career," he said unnecessarily, gesturing toward the display. "You've become remarkable." She studied the collection with detached interest, noting that he had documented her achievements with the obsessive thoroughness of someone trying to know a stranger through public information. "Why didn't you contact me sooner?" she asked directly. He settled into an armchair that had clearly been his designated spot for years, his movements careful in the way of someone whose body could no longer be trusted to support his ambitions. "Because I didn't think I had the right," he said simply. "Because I knew that everything I had given your mother, and by extension you, had been stolen from my wife and my other children. Because I was a coward who chose saving himself over taking responsibility for the life I had helped create." His honesty was more devastating than any excuse would have been. "Tell me about the affair," she said, settling into the chair across from him. "Your mother was the most intelligent woman I had ever met," he began, his voice carrying the weight of memory and regret. "She understood business in ways that my wife never did, could see opportunities and strategies that made me feel like I was finally working with an equal instead of just a partner. But you were married. I was married to a woman I had stopped loving years before I met Camille. Margaret and I had built a life together, had children together, but we had never built the kind of intellectual and emotional connection that your mother and I shared from the moment we started working together. So you stole money from your wife to fund the affair. His face flushed with shame. I told myself I was borrowing against future profits, that I would replace the money before anyone noticed. I convinced myself that what Camille and I had was worth the risk, until you got caught, until Margaret hired a forensic accountant and discovered that I had taken nearly $200,000 from our business accounts over the course of 2 years, money that belonged to her, to our children, to the employees whose salaries I had delayed to fund my double life. Amara absorbed the magnitude of his theft, understanding now why Camille had been so devastated by the betrayal. She gave you a choice. She gave me an ultimatum. End the affair. Sign over my half of the business to her as restitution and never contact Camille or acknowledge the child she was carrying, or face criminal charges that would have sent me to prison for embezzlement and fraud. And you chose to abandon us. I chose to avoid prison. I told myself I was choosing my existing children over my unborn child. But the truth is, I was choosing myself over everyone. The admission hung in the air between them, neither accusation nor justification, but simply the truth that had shaped both their lives. What happened after you wrote that letter? I lost everything anyway. Margaret divorced me, kept the business, made sure that everyone in our social and professional circles knew exactly why our marriage ended. My existing children blamed me for destroying their family. I spent the next decade trying to rebuild my career while battling depression and alcoholism. And now? Well, now I'm a 61-year-old man with a failing heart and a lifetime of regrets, working part-time to afford this apartment and medication that keeps me alive long enough to wonder whether my life had any meaning at all. He gestured toward the wall of articles about her success, and except for you, you gave my life meaning by becoming someone extraordinary, despite having a father who abandoned you before you were born. I became extraordinary because I had to, Amara corrected. Because the woman who raised me couldn't love me without seeing your face, and I had to find worth in achievement, since I couldn't find it in affection. Theodore's eyes filled with tears. I'm sorry. I know that's inadequate, but it's all I have to offer. I'm sorry for being a coward, for stealing money that didn't belong to me, for abandoning you and your mother when you needed me most. I didn't come here for apologies, Amara said. I came here to understand the complete story of where I came from. And now you know. Now I know that I was born from criminal betrayal, that my existence destroyed 2 families, and that both my parents were too damaged by their own choices to love me the way a child deserves to be loved, Amara. But I also know that none of that defines who I chose to become. She stood up, gathering her purse and the manila folder she had brought with her. I'm not angry with you, she said. I'm disappointed that you were such a weak man, but I'm not angry. Anger would require caring about your approval, and I stopped needing approval from absent fathers a long time ago. Is there anything I can do? Any way to make amends for what I did? She paused at the door, considering his question. You can stop collecting newspaper clippings about my life and pretending that my success gives your failures meaning, she said. You can accept that you were a criminal who abandoned his child. Serve whatever time you have left with dignity, and stop trying to claim credit for achievements that happened in spite of you, not because of you. And after I'm gone, after you're gone, I'll remember you as the man whose cowardice taught me never to run from my responsibilities, whose selfishness taught me the value of putting others first, and whose weakness taught me that strength is always a choice. She opened the door, then turned back one final time. For what it's worth, I forgive you. Not because you deserve forgiveness, but because carrying anger toward you would give you power over my life that you never earned and don't deserve. The drive back to Atlanta felt like traveling between different worlds, from the modest reality of consequences lived out in small apartments to the privileged landscape of wealth built on the foundation of others' failures. But instead of feeling guilty about the contrast, Amara felt something new, peace with the knowledge that her success belonged entirely to her. She had not inherited wealth built on theft. She had not benefited from advantages purchased with stolen money. Everything she had achieved had been earned through her own intelligence, determination, and refusal to accept limitations others had tried to place on her potential. When she arrived at the Harrison estate, she found Zara waiting in the foyer, her face tight with anxiety. "How did it go?" her sister asked immediately. "About as well as could be expected when meeting the criminal who abandoned you before you were born." Zara winced.
That bad?
"Actually, no. It was exactly what I needed it to be. Proof that I don't need anyone's approval to know my own worth." They were interrupted by the sound of voices from the living room. Through the archway, Amara could see Camille entertaining guests, her laughter carrying the forced brightness that always marked social performances. "She's been different since you confronted her about Theodore," Zara said quietly. "More fragile somehow. Like she's been holding herself together through anger for so long that she doesn't know who she is without it." "And how do you feel about that?" "Confused. I've spent my entire life being the daughter she could love easily, but now I'm wondering if easy love is just another kind of prison." Before Amara could respond, Donovan appeared in the foyer, his presence as unexpected as it was unwelcome. "Amara," he said, his voice carrying a mixture of relief and desperation. "I was hoping we could talk." "About what?" "About the biggest mistake I've ever made in my life." Zara looked between them with dawning understanding. "I'll leave you two alone," she said quickly, disappearing into the house with the instinct of someone who recognized an inevitable reckoning. "I ended things with Zara," Donovan said without preamble. "I'm sorry to hear that." "No, you're not, and you shouldn't be. What we had was never real. It was just me running away from something that scared me because it demanded that I become a better man." Amara studied his face, noting the lines of exhaustion and regret that hadn't been there when they were engaged. "And what is it you think you want now?" "I want the chance to prove that I can be the man who deserves you. I want to stop running from depth and complexity and challenge because I was too lazy to grow." "You had that chance, Donovan. You chose my sister instead. I chose fear instead. I chose the easy path instead of the meaningful one. But I've learned that easy and meaningless are the same thing, and I can't live in that space anymore." She looked at this man who had once represented everything she thought she wanted. Handsome, wealthy, charming enough to make her believe in fairy tale endings. But standing in the foyer of the house where she had spent years seeking approval from people who found her too challenging, she realized that she no longer needed anyone to validate her worth. "I'm glad you've learned something about yourself," she said gently, "but the woman you're trying to win back doesn't exist anymore. She was replaced by someone who doesn't need to be chosen, someone who does the choosing. I know that. I can see that you've become even more incredible than you were before. That's what makes me realize how much I lost when I was too stupid to appreciate what I had. What you had was a woman who was still seeking approval instead of demanding respect. What you lost was your chance to grow alongside someone who could have made you better." She moved toward the staircase. Their conversation concluded in her mind, even if it wasn't finished in his. "Amara, please. Just give me one chance to prove that I can be different." She paused on the first step, looking back at him with the kind of compassion usually reserved for well-meaning strangers. "You will be different, Donovan. You'll grow into the man you're capable of becoming, and you'll find someone who's perfect for that version of yourself. But that someone isn't me, and it never was. As she climbed the stairs to her room, leaving him standing in the foyer with the weight of choices that couldn't be undone, she felt the last chains of her old life falling away. She was no longer the daughter seeking her mother's love, the abandoned child yearning for her father's approval, or the fiancé trying to be worthy of a man's devotion. She was simply Amara Harrison, complete unto herself, and that was the most powerful thing she had ever been. Chapter 9. The Reckoning. Freedom tastes like tears at first, but then it becomes the sweetest thing you've ever known, especially when you realize that the cage you've escaped was always unlocked. You just had to believe you deserved to fly. The Southern Women's Business Summit in Charleston was the kind of event that redefined careers and shifted regional conversations about leadership in the modern economy. As Amara stepped onto the stage at the Charleston Convention Center, facing an audience of 2,000 women who represented the pinnacle of achievement across every industry in the Southeast, she felt the weight and privilege of speaking to people who understood the unique challenges of building empires while navigating a world that still questioned their right to power. The past 8 months had transformed her from successful businesswoman to regional icon. Her story, the abandoned daughter who built a multinational empire while overcoming family rejection, had resonated with thousands of women who saw their own struggles reflected in her journey. Speaking requests, business partnerships, and media opportunities flooded her office weekly. But she had learned to choose her platforms carefully, understanding that her voice now carried the hopes and dreams of women who needed to see someone like them succeeding without apology. 8 months ago, she began, her voice carrying easily through the packed auditorium, I believed that love was something you earned through achievement. That approval was a prize you won by being perfect enough to deserve it. The audience was completely silent, drawn in by the vulnerability of someone who typically projected unshakable confidence. I spent 28 years trying to become worthy of affection that was never going to be freely given, changing myself to fit expectations that were designed to keep me small, apologizing for qualities that were actually my greatest strengths. She paused, her eyes scanning the sea of faces that included Fortune 500 CEOs, tech entrepreneurs, award-winning artists, and groundbreaking scientists. What I learned is that the people who demand that you diminish yourself to earn their love are not the people whose opinions should shape your life. The right people, your people, will love you not in spite of your ambition, your intelligence, your refusal to be convenient, but because of those qualities. The applause was thunderous, but she continued speaking through it. You are not too much. You are not too intense, too demanding, too successful, too smart, too independent. You are exactly as much as the world needs you to be, and anyone who suggests otherwise is simply revealing their own limitations. When she finished 20 minutes later, the standing ovation lasted for nearly 10 minutes. Women approached the stage with tears in their eyes, sharing stories of their own struggles with family rejection, romantic disappointment, and the exhausting work of proving their worth to people who were determined to find them insufficient. Afterward, at the VIP reception, she found herself surrounded by the kind of powerful women she had spent years admiring from a distance. Media moguls wanted to collaborate on projects, tech entrepreneurs sought her guidance on expansion strategies, and politicians asked for her endorsement in campaigns that could reshape regional policy. Ms. Harrison. She turned to find a strikingly handsome man approaching, his warm brown eyes and confident smile suggesting intelligence and genuine warmth in equal measure. At 34, Dr. Jeremiah Wright possessed the kind of classical features that belonged in Renaissance paintings, but it was his obvious intelligence that made him truly compelling. Dr. Wright, she replied, recognizing him from his groundbreaking work in pediatric oncology. I'm familiar with your research. The childhood cancer treatment protocols you've developed are saving lives internationally. His face lit up with surprise and pleasure. You know my work. I make it my business to know people who are changing the world for the better. They talked for nearly 2 hours, their conversation ranging from medical innovation to business strategy, to their shared commitment to using success as a platform for meaningful change. He was brilliant without being condescending, accomplished without being arrogant, and genuinely interested in her work, rather than simply impressed by her wealth. I'd love to continue this conversation sometime, he said, as the reception was winding down. Perhaps over dinner when you're back in Atlanta? She looked into his eyes and saw something she had learned to recognize and value: genuine respect for her mind, her achievements, and her vision for making the world better. I'd like that very much, she said. The flight back to Atlanta gave her time to process how completely her life had transformed. 9 months ago, she had been begging for scraps of affection from people who saw her as fundamentally flawed. Tonight, she had commanded an audience of the South's most powerful women and attracted the attention of a man who valued her for all the qualities her own family had found threatening. When her driver pulled through the gates of the Harrison estate, she was surprised to see lights on throughout the main house, despite the late hour. As she entered the foyer, she found Camille and Zara waiting in the living room, their faces carrying expressions of anticipation mixed with something that looked almost like fear. "You're both up late," Amara observed. "We need to talk to you," Camille said, her usual authoritative tone replaced by something much more fragile. "About everything that's happened, about things we should have said months ago." Amara settled into the chair across from them, noting how different this configuration felt from every other family conversation they had ever had. Instead of being positioned as the outsider seeking inclusion, she was clearly the one whose attention they were seeking. "I'm listening," she said. Zara spoke first, her voice trembling with barely contained emotion. "I've been thinking about what you said, about easy love not being the same as valuable love. About how I've spent my entire life accepting adoration without questioning whether I deserved it or whether it was worth having. And what conclusions have you reached? That watching you build something meaningful while I posed for pictures has made me realize how empty my life has been. How much time I've wasted being beautiful instead of being important." Camille shifted uncomfortably, clearly struggling with her own admissions. "Your sister has been helping me understand some things about the way I raised both of you," she said carefully. "About the damage I did by treating love as a reward to be earned rather than a gift to be given freely. Such as the fact that I spent 28 years punishing you for being everything I was too afraid to become. Independent, ambitious, unwilling to compromise your vision for anyone else's approval." Amara waited, sensing that both women had more to say. "I got a call today," Camille continued, "from Theodore Blackstone himself. He's in Atlanta, at Emory Hospital. He had a heart attack and he's asking to see you." The room fell silent, except for the ticking of the antique clock that had measured out so many uncomfortable conversations in this space. "He came here? He drove from Birmingham yesterday, apparently to find you. The heart attack happened in the hospital parking lot. He's stable now, but the doctors say he has days, maybe a week." Amara absorbed this information with the same clinical detachment she brought to business decisions. Theodore Blackstone had finally reappeared, as she had always known he might. "He also asked the hospital to give you something," Camille said, producing a thick envelope that had been delivered by courier. "He said it was an inheritance he wanted to give you in person, but if he couldn't—" Amara opened the envelope to find legal documents transferring ownership of several properties in Birmingham, along with a letter written in Theodore's careful handwriting. "Amara," the letter began, "these properties represent the only honest money I ever made. After I lost everything through my own failures, I bought them with my part-time real estate earnings over the past 15 years, renovating them myself and renting them to families who needed affordable housing. They generate about $60,000 annually in rental income, modest by your standards. But I've arranged for this money to fund scholarships for first-generation college students in Birmingham and Atlanta. I know you don't need my money, but perhaps you can use this small gesture to help other young people who are building their futures despite difficult beginnings. This is not an attempt to buy forgiveness. I know I forfeited the right to your love before you were even born. It's simply an acknowledgement that you deserved a father who would have been proud to support your dreams instead of one who was too weak to try. I hope someday you can forgive me for being the coward who abandoned you, even though I understand if you cannot. He's trying to make amends, Zara said softly. He's trying to die with some dignity, Amara corrected, which is more than he lived with for most of his life. She folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope, her decision made with characteristic decisiveness. I'll go see him, Amara said finally. Not because I want a relationship with him, but because I need to close this chapter completely. Are you sure? I'm sure. He came here looking for me, and I won't let him die wondering if I received his message. 2 hours later, Amara sat in the sterile hospital room at Emory, looking at the man who had abandoned her before she was born. Theodore Blackstone, at 61, looked every day of his age, connected to monitors and breathing with difficulty. But his honey-colored eyes, so much like her own, were alert and filled with something she had never expected to see: genuine remorse. Amara, he whispered, you came. I came. I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness, he said, his voice weak but determined. I know that driving here was probably selfish, that seeing me might cause you more pain. Why did you come? Because I've spent 28 years being a coward, and I didn't want to die as one. Because you deserve to hear from me directly that your success, your strength, your incredible life, none of it happened because of me. It happened despite me. And I needed you to know that I see that, and I'm proud of the woman you became without me. She studied his face, seeing not the villain she had imagined, but a broken old man trying to find some meaning in his failures. I forgive you, she said simply. Not for your sake, but for mine, his eyes filled with tears. Thank you, but forgiveness doesn't mean I need you in my life. It just means I'm no longer carrying the weight of your choices, he nodded, understanding. The properties in Birmingham, they're yours now. Use them however you see fit. Help other people build the futures I was too weak to help you build. 3 days later, Theodore Blackstone died peacefully in his sleep at Emory Hospital. Amara attended his funeral, not as a grieving daughter, but as a woman who had chosen to close a painful chapter with dignity rather than bitterness. That's all? Camille asked. That's enough. He was never my father in any meaningful sense, and his death doesn't change that. But I can honor his attempt at redemption by turning it into something that helps other people. Zara leaned forward, her voice urgent with emotion. Amara, I need to tell you something else. About my future, about what I want to become. What about it? I've been accepted to graduate school, MBA program at Emory, with a focus on non-profit management. I want to learn how to turn resources into meaningful change the way you have. Amara felt something shift in her chest, not quite forgiveness, but recognition of genuine growth in someone who had never been challenged to grow before. That's wonderful. Zara, it's going to be harder than modeling, but more rewarding in the long run, I know. And I know I have 25 years of shallow thinking to overcome. But watching you has made me realize that I'd rather fail at something meaningful than succeed at something empty. Camille had been silent during this exchange, but now she cleared her throat with obvious nervousness. I have something to confess as well. she said. "About the business opportunities I mentioned wanting to discuss with you." "Yes?" "I don't have any business opportunities. What I have is a complete collapse of the social identity I built over the past 30 years. The charity boards, the social committees, the fundraising events, they all want access to you now, not me. I've become irrelevant except as your mother." The admission was clearly devastating for a woman who had built her entire sense of self on social prominence and carefully cultivated influence. "I need your help," Camille continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not just for business opportunities, but for learning how to matter in the world in ways that don't depend on other people's approval. You want me to teach you how to build something meaningful. I want you to teach me how to become the kind of woman who could have raised a daughter like you instead of spending 28 years trying to diminish her light." The request hung in the air like a bridge that neither of them was sure could support the weight of their shared history. "I can't give you back the years we lost," Camille said. "I can't undo the damage I did by making you feel unwanted and insufficient. But maybe I can spend whatever time I have left learning how to be worthy of being your mother." Amara stood up, walking to the windows that looked out over the gardens where she had spent so many childhood hours alone, processing the magnitude of what both women were asking of her. "This isn't about forgiveness," she said finally. "This is about whether you're both willing to do the hard work of becoming different people rather than just saying you want to change." "We are," Zara said immediately. "I am," Camille added with quiet desperation. "Then we'll start slowly. Zara, I'll help you with your graduate school applications and connect you with non-profit leaders who can mentor you. Camille, I'll introduce you to organizations that could use your organizational skills and social connections for meaningful projects." She turned back to face them, her expression serious but not unkind. "But I need you both to understand that this isn't about rebuilding our family relationships. This is about helping you become people I might eventually choose to have relationships with." "I understand," Camille said. "We both understand," Zara added. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jeremiah. "Thank you for an incredible evening. I can't stop thinking about our conversation. Would tomorrow night be too soon for that dinner?" She smiled, typing back, "Tomorrow night would be perfect." For the first time in her life, she was not just being chosen, she was doing the choosing. And the woman she had chosen to become was exactly who she had always been meant to be. Chapter 10. Reborn in Power. The greatest revenge against those who tried to break you is becoming everything they said you could never be, then using that power to lift up everyone they said didn't matter. The morning sun painted Amara's bedroom in shades of gold as she prepared for her wedding to Dr. Jeremiah Wright. The ivory silk gown, designed by a celebrated designer, seemed to glow against her mahogany skin, its elegant lines emphasizing her regal bearing while intricate beadwork told the story of strength rising from struggle. 1 year had brought extraordinary changes. Her business empire now spanned 4 continents. Her non-profit had established programs in 12 countries, and the documentary about her journey had won international awards. More importantly, she had found in Jeremiah a love that celebrated rather than diminished her strength. "You look absolutely stunning," Zara said, entering in deep blue silk. Graduate school had revealed intellectual capabilities long dormant beneath years of focusing on appearance, and her work with disadvantaged youth had given her genuine purpose. The ceremony transformed the estate gardens into something magical. 300 guests filled the seating, business leaders who had become genuine friends, philanthropists whose work she respected, and the women from her community center who had witnessed her transformation. Jeremiah waited beneath the ancient oak tree. At 34, he had revolutionized pediatric cancer treatment, but he looked at her as if she were the greatest miracle he had ever witnessed. Amara, You taught me that love isn't about finding someone who completes you. It's about finding someone who inspires you to become complete within yourself, he said during his vows. I promise to celebrate your strength instead of being intimidated by it. When Amara spoke, her voice carried the authority of someone who had learned to speak truth without apology. You showed me what it feels like to be loved for who I am. I promise to build dreams with you instead of asking you to fit into dreams I've built alone. The reception filled the main house with celebration. As evening approached, she found herself in conversation with Camille, whose expression carried careful vulnerability. I wanted to thank you for showing me what it looks like to use privilege responsibly, her mother said quietly. I know I can never undo the damage I did, but watching you today, I understand that you were never the problem. Your strength, your intelligence, those were gifts I was too broken to appreciate. Yes, Amara agreed simply. I did deserve better than that. As the last guests departed, Amara and Jeremiah stood on the terrace overlooking the gardens where she had spent so many lonely hours as a child. Any regrets? Jeremiah asked. Only that it took me so long to understand that I didn't need anyone's permission to be extraordinary, she replied. Amara looked out over the estate that had shaped her, then at the man who had chosen to build a future with her, then at the life she had created through unshakable belief in her own worth. She sees a woman who spent 28 years being the daughter no one wanted, only to discover she was exactly the woman the world had been waiting for.